Hi, and welcome to this episode of Network AF. Today, I'm talking to Kat Gurinsky, an amazing networker, friend of mine from NANOG community. We're going to talk about her passion for anime, Japanese, karate, networking, and we're going to talk about automation, some of the things that she's been doing with it, advice for people looking to get into automation, and advice for people looking to get into the field of networking. Today, I'm here with my friend, Kat Gurinsky, who's been in networking, and we're going to talk about community, technology, and maybe some non-networking things as well. Hi, Kat. Could you give us a brief introduction to, yourself, personal and work?
Hi. So my name's Kat Gurinsky. I've been working in network engineering since about 2007. So good, like 14 years now. I worked in computer repair before that as well. I was in college. I am a little odd though, because I have a Japanese major for my bachelor's and master's. So it doesn't quite, compute when you're putting that together. But I was always really into computers early on. My dad was actually the computer lab teacher when I was growing up. So it kind of ended up being a natural fit for my actual job. And it's hard to get a job as a translator, which was my original dream as a child. It also doesn't pay nearly as well. So if I did get a job as a translator, I would not be on the same pay scale. And then I own a karate dojo in Austin, Texas. And I have two small children, and we live here out in Austin.
Cool. I did not know that you had wanted to go down the translation route. I have a friend and amazing woman I went to high school with, Irit Trich, who is Israeli, but actually wound up moving to Japan and then wound up doing tri-way translation, Hebrew, Japanese, English, and now is expert at training dog trainers, other things, because I think, there's only so many manuals that one can translate and things, in the market. So you mentioned computer repair and hopefully not just like supporting people whose hard disks were full and they couldn't, web browse because of it. But how did you get into networking?
So the computer repair was, people like who had broken hard drives or, broken CPUs that were starting to smoke or whatever. I actually went to computer repair school at a tech school during high school.
Oh,
for my one fun story. Yeah. So I knew that I was going to go to college. I was one of those honors kids, like I was definitely on the college path, right? But I also knew that I didn't want to go to college and work at McDonald's. That was never like me. I was like, I want to have a better job. So I convinced my parents to send me to tech school, which is where most of the high school dropouts went, right? But I was like, no. I need to go to tech school so I can get a good college job while I'm doing college, And so I was like, I can put all my AP classes in the morning and I go to tech school in the evening. I had it all planned out. And they're like, okay, you made your case. They let me go. And I did my junior year of high school. So then I worked at the IT department at my university for the entire time I was studying for undergrad and graduate. But what happened was when I was working at that IT department as an undergrad student, one of my jobs was a technology assistant, as they called it, which was that we helped get students online during move-in, like freshmen and stuff, and then just help them with connectivity problems throughout the year. That was our assistant role of the job. And when I graduated, we only had a single network engineer that worked at the university, and he was looking to hire a full-time network engineer to work under him. And now I didn't have any network engineering experience at this point. I just had lots of computer repair, right? Because I'd done all this stuff at the IT department. But, he'd see me help get people online. We deployed a Cisco Clean Access. I don't even know if that product's still around.
No, I don't know what that is.
It's a NAC solution. So it was something that you would log into, and then it would verify on your computer that you had like antivirus software, that your firewall was turned on, like that kind of stuff, making sure you met minimum requirements, that you weren't a risk to the network to infect the entire student base. Yeah. And I helped deploy that as a student employee. So it was like the one thing working in my favor. But he knew from the years of my time at the IT department that I could learn. And so he was like, here, you can apply for the job. I'm going to be the one interviewing you anyway. He's like, go study some stuff so I can ask you some relevant questions, from the textbook. He's like, but, I know you can do it. So it's pretty much a shoo-in, right? And I'm like, okay. And so I got hired as a full-time, on staff at the university. But it was basically an apprenticeship because I'd never written any Cisco code at that point. Like I didn't have my clue what to do with a switch or an an access point. I only knew how to deploy that one server,
ARP and Mac were fuzzy concepts.
L2, L3, what does this mean? How do I terminate coax and Ethernet and fiber? And I actually learned all of that stuff at that job. So it was really cool, because it was like an apprenticeship, and those don't exist too often these days, but I basically got a network engineering apprenticeship with him. And we worked together for like about a year and a half, and then he left to go somewhere else, and it was just me. Scariest time of my life. I stayed for another year, hated the boss I had, and left. So, yeah, the boss I had didn't really believe in me was the problem, because I'd only been there in that role for about a year before my boss left. So
it was more just lack of experience than than you not being like his expectations of. Well,
yeah, and he felt my lack of experience meant that I couldn't possibly know what I was talking about either, and so he never took my advice on anything. Even though like Simon, my boss that had trained me, in that apprenticeship type role, Simon had trained me very well, but he just could not believe that I actually knew anything really, and that was kind of the impression I always felt working with that other boss after Simon left me. And so that got really frustrating pretty fast. And Simon, as it turns out, was friends with Chris Malater. They had gone to school together. So this is where it all ties in. And Chris was like, hey, Kat, I'm just going to take you, and you're going to come over here and work for Switching Data with me. And I'm like, okay, please save me. Thank you. So I met Chris through Simon, because they were like really close friends, and that was how I got out of that situation, and how I ended up at Switching Data, which went through the merger about a year and a half into that, into Equinix. So, and that's how I found NANOG too, because Chris said, come on, let's go to this conference,
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, my experience has been that most of the people in networking, especially when I was starting, were sort of self-taught. And so
definitely for me.
understood that everyone was learning all the time. So the only way to become expert was to go break it and figure out how to unbreak it.
Oh, yes. So true. I remember so many times that I'd be like trying to troubleshoot something at the university when I worked with Simon. And I'd be like, Simon, how do I do this? And he was not the type of person that would just tell you how to do it. So he'd be like, go look it up. Like, but it's probably easy. Go look it up. Like, I remember that very vividly my first year of employment. And so many times I would get so mad at him. But like, it made me so much better because I learned to look it up. I learned to try to fumble through it. Because at the end of the day, we worked at the university. If I did break it a little worse than like 3 a.m, no one's going to notice. They're all sleeping, and he'd help me unbreak it before they all woke up,
The wizard, Steve Robinson, who worked with my father doing medical research, who, sort of was like, you don't want to do that basic stuff. You want to use Unix and C. And this was like in 1980. But when I would do things like I would go to him and say, so I want to, do a science project. Let me, see if I can recognize images with the computer. He's like, that's actually a much harder problem than you think. I'll tell you what. And then he picks up a piece of paper and draws and punches it with a pencil and says, go look at the world 1 pixel at a time and tell me what you see. Think about it, come back and have questions for me. But yeah. Or when I asked him, like, how should I administer this Unix machine? He's like, well, run / and figure out what every file does and ask me if you have questions. So... But, you do have to have time and privilege to be able to do and learn that way, right? You have to, I remember, I had similar in college. I had done a bunch of computer stuff, but I met actually the guy that did image processing and the guy that did networking. I was like, oh, networking. I mean, yeah, sure, whatever. And then, but, he like me would go to the computer shows, buy parts, build computers. He was doing it because we were at a state school that had no budget so he was, like scrounging lab, and I was building computers for like law firms and stuff. And then, so then I got interested, we had this empty thing called a T1 and then had to figure it out.
I remember my high school got a T1. It was the biggest deal.
Oh my God, T1 to the high school. Wow, that would have been.
Oh yeah, that was like probably when I think I was in like 10th grade, because I remember taking my C++ class, and like we'd just gone into that year, and you're going to laugh at this one.
C++ in 10th grade? Wow.
Yeah, I took a C++ class in 10th grade. But I remember, like, because it was, it was a pretty easy thing for me to take that class. So when we had free time after we did our programming exercise, all of us would go log in and play Neopets. That's going to age me because nobody plays that anymore.
Well,
but it was at home. We had dial-up. All of us had this horrible connection, so you could never like get the really fast things you had to click for loading quickly. But we could do it at the school at the T1. You know?
I'm having a vision of dial-up pixelated whatever. What is it? Neopets?
Neopets. It's like think like a Tamagotchi or something. But it's like you have this little
like
avatar thing. You have to like.
It sounds like we should go make an NFT and
you know, and they had lots of mini games that you play to help get stuff to make your Neopet better. But yeah, it was this very silly game, and I don't think I think it still exists, but I don't think anybody plays it mainstream anymore like they used to back then.
Okay, I predict within a year we'll see it, NFT, on the crypto space. So, you talked a little bit about how you got in, and it sounds like you're fortunate, but also applied yourself and prepared, even back from high school. And I will say, by the way, that also when I was in high school, there was people that owed tech school, but I will, it's worth noting how much more money plumbers and electricians make and carpenters than many
I have
people
a lot
who
of
did not go.
Yeah.
And then frustration if you find people that are maybe expect people to look like to already have experience. I posted something on LinkedIn. I think they were looking for 56 years of firewall experience.
What?
Yeah, actually, Rachel Bicknell had found it, and I commented and then reposted it. It was so we're like, no, they mean base 50.
She finds some really funny job postings, I have to say.
Yes, absolutely. So. What is the biggest outage you have caused without automation?
That's funny, given the recent Facebook story.
Yes.
So I was working. I think we were still switching data yet. I don't think we had merged and become Equinix. So I believe this is shortly before the merger. I was tasked with collecting a bunch of information from show commands. I can't remember what exactly I was inventorying, but I was basically supposed to inventory stuff. And all I had to do was do show commands all day long for this project for like a week. Mm-hmm. And we had an Extreme Networks chassis switch in the Palo Alto PAX data center. Uh-huh. And I was just going site by site. And because we were all remote, one of my few jobs where we were remote before COVID, I could do some of it during the day, some of it during night. It didn't really matter what time of day I did it. They didn't care as long as I got it done in the time allotted to me, right. So I think it was probably 8 or 9. It was sometime in the evening, like after normal hours. And I'm just like, okay, let's continue working on this because I got some free time and I'm doing my show commands and the switch rebooted. Oh no, it gets better though. Right. So if it just rebooted, that wouldn't be so bad. It came back. We had no console to it, so I couldn't actually see that it came back, but evidently it came back without a config. So I'm waiting for this thing
like
to
a
reboot.
write erase.
Yes, pretty much. But I didn't write it. I literally had only done show commands. It was some bug that it hit, right? Anyway, but I'm sitting there I can't ping it. It's not coming back. I'm freaking the F out, what's going on? And I'm only been at this job for maybe a year or less at this point because I was only there a year and a half before the merger. And I remember it was before the merger. Right. And so I have to call the poor one local. They only had one engineer that actually lived in the Palo Alto area. So I'm like, Helen, I need you to go down to the PAX, help. And so he had to wake. He was awake. It wasn't that late, but still, it was past after hours. It was dark. He had to get up and go drive down, and he had to go fix it for me by hand. Now, thankfully, we didn't have any of these locked out security issues like that. This was just an internet exchange switch, for the PAX. But still, that switch stayed down for a couple hours until he was able to bring it back. No, I didn't lose my job or anything, and it was fine.
But you didn't cause it other than by tickling bugs somehow.
I just triggered a bug. I didn't do it. I didn't do a change. I didn't make any changes. I literally was only doing a show command. But man, I was freaking out for the good couple hours until that thing came back and he manually reconfigured it. Because
I've had a few people who've worked for me before where they're like, oh my god, it's awesome. Now you get to fix it. They're like, no, I broke it. I'm like, yeah, that means you get to fix it.
Yeah, I lived in Northwest Indiana at the time, so there's definitely no way I could help. I was way too remote,
Oh, so that was interesting, right? So that was really remote, for the time. I mean, NTT America Vario was remote. I mean, some companies were pretty remote at the time, but that's one of the questions that's really interesting is how do we help people lab and understand how things break and how to fix them without actually breaking the internet and people's applications. That's something that I was talking to the Uber driver about yesterday because he's like, what do you do? And I said, we make the internet go. And he's like, I have a CC NA and it's expired. I'm like, don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. Like, don't worry that it's expired. Like, go play with, virtual stuff and, show that. And I told, I told them, because I was in Virginia yesterday. Since I'm getting back like 3 years ago, I have to remember what city I was in, this morning. And I was like, and he was driving me to Equinix DC3. And I'm like, look, all these buildings, they all have operations groups. And if you have bright, shiny eyes, they can, there's networking, there's cabling, there's, just support and operations. And yeah, a lot of it is centralized. But like, if you're really interested, because you wanted to not be an Uber driver, I was like, just apply to all these, apply. And, I give my email address and, good luck, hopefully that will happen. So, so I mentioned automation because, automation can be a good way to help humans be lazy. I always try to be like, wait, why am I doing this over and over? Why am I doing show commands over and over and over?
Right. Why am I doing something like the same thing over and over when I could automate it? Right.
But if you automation is also a way to break things really fast.
Yes.
If you don't think about it well. And further, we see a lot of our customers are like, oh, I'm so behind. And, because the vendors are like, oh, it's all self-driving networks and closed loop automation and magic models and intent. And, most of our customers are like, if they have life cycle, like I turn it on, turn it off, inventory it, the interface descriptions are set, like basic health. So, then they're doing pretty well. And so this has been, a focus of yours, Python and is it more internet side or data center or, what kind of network are you focusing on?
Yeah. So for me in my current role, it's definitely data center side because I'm just doing really large scale deployments, like hundreds of switches instead of like, a couple. And so it's both the automating of the deployment. So a lot of, Python scripting and power on auto provisioning and Ansible usage and all that stuff, just to make life easier, including like, automate even assigning IP addresses, et cetera, too. Like the more, like you said, the more I can automate that I'm just going to do by hand, the better, because I can, in theory, reduce human error risk. And then after, things come up too, like it's a matter of like automating my troubleshooting as well. Like some of my favorite things to do is to write like Arista API scripts. I love their API. It's really easy to work with. And if you know Python, it's just all interactive Python with their API. And I got to this point where like, okay, every time a link has errors or there's some sort of issue with a link, like I'm going to do the same 10 show commands, right? And so I just was like, why don't I just automate that, and I can do that all through the API and just grab all of that data that I need every time. If I'm going to be doing the same commands, I might as well have the API grab it really quickly. I physically cannot type those commands as fast as the API can execute them, right? And then they're always going to be the same. All I have to tell it is host name and port number, making my life way easier. So,
is there any rate limiting concern? Like, what if everything started showing, interface? Does the Arista do its own rate limiting, or did you have to implement that yourself?
I don't think there's one that I've been able to hit yet. There may be a rate limit, but I've not been able to hit it yet. Like for example, one script that I wrote, which is kind of in between deployment and troubleshooting, is I got really tired when we would deploy like a ton of servers on a whole rack, and then having to go back and put port names in there. Because I didn't like having like ports that didn't tell me what server they went to. Like I really want to know, what does this connect to, right? So later on, if somebody's like saying, hey, my server's having issues, yes, traceroute will tell me where your port is, and, show MAC address will show me where it is, but it's even better if I can label the port, right? And so I wrote this script, like the first thing I wrote actually when I took the Arista API class that they taught, back in 2017, so 4 years ago, I took that class and had that little light bulb moment of like things I could do with the API. And that was the first light bulb that went off. I was like, I could automate putting port descriptions on switch ports. Like between LLDP and ARP and IPv6 neighbors, like I could, between one of those functions, I should be able to figure out what connects here, right? And instead of me having to do those 3 different commands to figure out what connects here, like I could just automate that. And so that script that runs really fast, like I can run it against all the ports, and it'll just like, and so I can't think of anything else I would run that would be fast. That would be more requiring of rate limiting really than something like that, where it just goes bam, 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 bam. But when I run it, it just goes quick. It does the IP lookups and everything. If it's ARP, it does the LDP and everything really fast. And the switch replies with everything all through the API and then updates our descriptions for me.
So what's in this case, the source of truth is so you're rewriting it. It's not a database. It's not like a netbox.
No, it's not a database. I'm doing like an ASP build, basically.
I'm sorry?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm doing an ASP build, basically. Like, it's like, this is the reality. Yeah.
Okay.
So we don't keep a database for what port gets wired to what server. So yeah, like I try via a couple different methods. I usually preference our LDP first, because that's very, very reliable for the port, right? But if it's a port channel, then obviously I'm going to preference ARP if I can. And then if it's a V6 neighbor, then I got to do V6 neighbors instead, because you're not going to have ARP obviously on there instead. So I kind of go in that pecking order though. LDP, check ARP, check V6 neighbors if it's not a P4 address. And yeah, so it's it's definitely there. And
hopefully no one has jacked a switch into the other end. So there's many ARPs, many things that you see on the either ARPing or Mac learned through to the other. They should just be access, I guess, if they're all
right. Well, yeah, exactly. So since it is a data center, it's a very standard build as far as how the ports are laid out and what's going on them. And I've never ran into that in the data center world. The enterprise world, when I used to do that, yes, I've run into that all the time. People plugging hubs and other switches and things into stuff they shouldn't. But the data center side, that's really not a non-issue for us. Plus, our uplinks are going to be on QSFPs and our servers are going to be on SFP or on copper. So again, you can't accidentally plug into the wrong thing because it's a completely different,
That sounds like a design feature for sure.
Yeah.
To have physical incompatibility with things you don't want to plug in. And yeah, I mean, we see that, we have some features we built that assumed that people configure things with regex, like you could regex match, interfaces to find, server dash, whatever, peering, whatever, that people would do that. And then you find definitely some networks that have organically evolved where, in the worst case, if there's an interface description, it's wrong because people just gave up. And so then this question of what's the source of truth, in a non-well-formed data, center world can be interesting. People try to have sometimes the IPAM, the CMDB, the configs, and they're like, oh, but it's some of it is true in each of those. And it's like, no, start there.
One thing I have to always be careful of is, like, for that script, since it is doing, what's actually connected, right, is that we don't want to run it too early. So we want to audit and make sure that people plug things in correctly, like uplinks, for example, right? So like if we usually do like 4 uplinks on our switches, right? So like maybe the first 2 came up, but the second 2 didn't because they accidentally flipped those when they were cabling them for us, right? So maybe core 3 and core 4 are flipped on the switch, right? Well, if I run the script though, and it looks at LDP, it's going to put that wrong label on that wrong port, right? And then somebody might think it's supposed to be like that, So it's like one of those, make sure like all your links are actually up before you run the script, make sure it's correct, so you got a little bit. The service is less of an issue because they're all accessed on the same VLAN, it's all.
Yeah, that is an interesting, yes, that's interesting. If the source of truth is the network itself, right, and you start labeling it too early while it's still in flux, then it could confuse people who are trying to operate it, right? Who didn't create
it. And so then you'd have to rerun the script later. But now for that little in-between time, right, you've got that wrong label on there. So that's one thing we try to do with bring ups, at least, is we wait till we verify that all the BGP's up and then all that stuff goes where we ask for the patch plan for the switch to switch stuff.
Right.
Now the servers, it's really hard for us to tell if it's actually done correctly. Really, the only thing we have a different guy who wrote a script to look at the database of the LDP. And the only thing we really audit on are redundant switches where we have, 2 in M-like pairs. We will compare and make sure that the LDP is the same on the same number of ports, right? So if we see like port 3 has server A and over here it's on port 4, okay, then obviously somebody cabled something wrong, It's like that's like something else we've got to check for, because then the M-like is not going to come up because they're on the wrong ports.
I mean, it's interesting. Some of the table state can be really useful. People are, I know a couple companies that have made streaming telemetry of the blurp everything work, but that's really hard versus just, do the show things match up.
Exactly.
No, I'll have to see if I can torture the Aristas. So far, they've done everything I've wanted, rate limiting wise.
Exactly. Yeah. I've never had it barf unless I had a wrong password or something. Or just did the wrong command.
No, I got so annoyed with I have a 9001 that I put in the CO cabinet because I still have a 3PXL that's got /24s filtered there. And I was like, wait, I have to Google this just as much as if I were, sticking an MX in. I think I should just go with it. And I used Arista for someone, just help them set up a lab of like data center, like you're talking about. And it was like, wait, this is just iOS with commit confirm and bash. This is like much better.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. I can't go back now. Like I'm so spoiled. Like I can't go back to something else. I like it too much. It feels like home when I'm on that box, you know?
I mean, there's definitely a lot of Juniper bigots, but I'm just slower when I have to. And I'm always doing display set and they make fun of me and like, oh, but Avi, you like C coding. Why don't you like braces? I'm like, that's for programming. This is for router configs. Like they're different.
Right. And I do like programming, you know, I like Python doesn't have any of the bracket stuff either, but you know, I've not done that kind of programming in so long that it's just easier for me to stay on the other side.
Yes. So it sounds like, you know, I would say you're doing stuff that's, especially, you know, with the show and augmenting and some diagnostics, it's probably more than even the average, you know, that we see. Where would you advise people to, like, what's been helpful for you to try to learn? Do you use virtual Aristas? Were there particular Python, you know, their libraries you love, or there, you know, or, you know, anything in particular that you can remember that you'd point people towards if they're looking to start doing the automation dance?
Yeah, so I definitely recommend like taking some intro classes for sure, just to kind of like get your feet wet. Because I'm a good self-learner, but I always find that like that initial like, you know, dipping your foot in the pool type thing helps a lot with the intro class. And then once you got like the feet in, then it's easier to submerge the rest of the body, right? So for me, like I took the actual Arista API class that they were offering. I think they still offer it now, or at least they did pre-pandemic. You know, if you're looking to do like something with like Ansible and take an Ansible introduction class, you know, like do those intro classes to at least get the framework before you just dive into the deep end, open up the books and go looking for this exact type of thing you're doing. And for me, like it did help that, you know, back in high school, right, I took that C++ class. And then during like college, I did a lot of like HTML and CSS stuff. So I had a kind of framework. I did a lot of self-learning for PHP at the beginning of my network engineering career. Well, all my scripts used to be PHP. I actually didn't switch to Python until I took that Arista class. And they're like, well, you're going to have to learn Python for this. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'll start reading up. So that I did self-teach. But then like, you know, the examples they taught us in the class to interact with their API helped like from that baseline. Like, okay, here's the basics of Python. Here's how they're actually doing it. And then I was able to learn more from there, seeing it all put together. But yeah, definitely intro classes, I think, were the biggest help for me. And then as far as like labs, I've been really blessed that we have physical labs here at my current job, but obviously like GNS3 with like, you know, virtual EOS image or something would be the way to go if you don't have that, which the average person probably does not have a physical lab. I happen to work for a very large company, so there's the difference.
And, or, you know, it used to be people would eBay, you know, stuff and try to make their own.
That does work too. Yep.
Yes, but virtual is pretty good. Yeah, I was surprised when I looked at the Arista side how much, well, if you haven't ever used the CLI, you probably should do that before you try to do automation. You know, again, there's a lot of intent and models, but you know, when you actually look at how you automate the major vendors, you sort of do have to understand how it thinks of itself and CLI, you know, to get stuff. So
and you have to learn how JSON works too, because you need to understand how to read the JSON dictionary. So much of what you get back from the show commands on API queries are going to be like in JSON format. So that's something you need to quickly learn and adapt to understanding, you know, how to find your nestled variable inside that show command, because it's not going to give you the text. It's going to give you a JSON version of the text. One cool thing on the Arista is that, you know, you can do your show command on the actual Arista and then just pipe it JSON. And if it's supported, it'll give you what that JSON format looks like on the switch.
So you can just debug. Yeah. So you can.
Yeah. So before you go to write a new script, right, you know, okay, I want to use something where I'm going to do like, you know, show version, right? But like, I don't know how the JSON is going to look and I don't want to start from the script, right? So I go to the switch, I type show version, pipe JSON, and then I see right there on the switch what the output's going to look like. So now I can go back and write my programming based on what I know to expect.
Does it show you JQ'd, you know, like pretty printed, or does it show you like all like blah?
On the switch, it'll be pretty print by default. Yeah. So it's nicely spaced.
Trying to figure stuff out, and I still use Perl because I'm old. You know, even though it gives me a little bit of a headache to navigate the hashes that JSON parses into, I need to get with the Python at some point. I just think the white space shouldn't be syntax, that we should have braces. For coding, we should have braces.
Oh, I know. That part does still bother me a lot. I agree. I'm very used to, like, you know, I did my PHP. I'm very used to the brackets to tell me which blocks belong where. But
doesn't matter.
Used it over time. Yeah.
I can't fight the industry. The industry has decided Python.
Exactly. And that's where I caved.
So in your background, you know, you were talking about sort of, you know, dipping your toe in and before, you know, your whole body. And I remember my experience, you know, getting into martial arts where not only I, but everyone else thought I was just going to I was turning red. I was 320 pounds. People thought I was going to die.
Oh, wow.
But I just, for me personally, I suck at it so badly that it takes all my mental focus, and then I don't notice I'm exercising, and then I'm learning, and I enjoy things that I suck, but but I'm just curious. So I guess you mentioned you have Japanese, Japanese studies, and I guess that has some relation. But I'm really curious: is there a connection, between martial arts and networking? Anything that helps you from one to the other, or is it more of a disconnect? How do you find it and think about it? As I know a few people in the community, they're into martial arts, and you're sort of actually have a school, right? So.
Yeah. Crazy people like me opening schools during pandemics. Well, I got into martial arts before anything else, really. So the Japanese and the martial arts definitely relate heavily for me because I was really big into anime. I was one of those dorky otaku kids growing up, like skinny and lanky and getting picked on. And I just loved watching my anime, And so one of my friends actually found this karate school that had a sword class, an Iaido sword class.
Oh, wow.
Kat, we can go take sword and learn to be like Kenshin. That was what she told me. Sold me on that. I'm like, oh, sure, let's go learn to be like Kenshin from the anime,
Wow.
And then eventually, after like a summer of doing sword, they convinced us to stay for the karate class. And so that was kind of the beginning of everything. That was 2000, so like 21 years ago. But yeah, so that's how those two relate for me. Is my Japanese interest came from the anime. My martial arts interest also came from the anime.
Cool.
But I mean, there's definitely relations, right? Because I mean, martial arts to me is kind of like another language. It's a language of the body, right? Versus like, networking is a language of the switches, and then the programming is, the language of the code to interact with everything. So I think there's some similarities, but it is also my break from the day job as well. So when I sit there and program all day, I don't move from this chair very much. I'm very dormant on this chair for, hours at a time. And that's the opposite of when I'm in the dojo, moving around constantly, like no downtime. Like I have a chair and a desk at the dojo, but that's really only for when it's not class time. If I get there early and needed to, update the website or something, like it's about the only time I'll use that. The rest of the time, like I never sit in that chair at the dojo. I am up on my feet, whether I'm talking to a parent, talking to a student. So I don't know.
Primitives. It's interesting because in networking, people are trying to get into networking. I say, the most specific route always wins. You could remember this because if you couldn't get to your own, if the default route, if the biggest route won, you couldn't talk to yourself because
exactly.
In martial arts, it's like remember to breathe. It's like I know how to breathe. And then you discover maybe you don't know how to breathe.
Yeah, because I try to remember this so hard.
I did that. I almost feel like Avi, you're going to pass out. I was like, oh shit, maybe I don't know how to breathe. Maybe I should think about that.
Yeah.
And
we definitely go back to basics a lot too. Like people don't realize, but there's so much focus on basics in martial arts, just like your basic stance, where your hand is, your positioning, how you're leaning into something, if you're back straight, if you're squatting down low, lots of like fine details that matter in martial arts.
That is one of the things that I find fascinating myself, which is that I can see how people that can do things much better than me are doing it not quite right. They don't, I don't give them my opinion, but,
right.
But I'm still sucking so badly. I'm so far behind. Like I remember the first time I could make my body do each of those, sort of basic things. And then when I was starting, it was the ukemi roll, which I really sucked at, but I still do a little bit. But and the internet and networking, like the human body, there's so much that can go wrong. So luckily, I haven't injured myself at martial arts, and hope everything is good at your school from that perspective.
Yeah, same.
Cool. So we talked about automation, which is one of the things that I hear a lot as people saying, oh, I'm behind and this is the hotness and everything else. And, then I say, well, you should be thinking about it if you're not, but, the people are not living in this completely automated world with no humans and it's all APIs. What else, as you look at networking, is there anything that you're really looking forward to immersing yourself in between, self-exploration and classes and things? Anything you're following that you'd like to be working with?
My kind of big self-driven thing when we step away from automation is IPv6, especially when you're looking at large scale data centers. Like there's just so much IP address wasting in the V4 world. Like point to points are my favorite example of this, right? Yes. Like my typical install for an edge switch, top of rack switch is going to be 4 uplinks, right? So 4 uplinks means that I have 8 IPv4 addresses.
That's better than it used to be when
I know
it
it's
went
better.
/30, right? Yeah.
Yeah, we are doing 31s, not 30s. Like, so I could be wasting twice as many. At least I'm doing that. But even that's still 8 addresses for every single switch I want to deploy, minimum. Plus the loopback, but the loopbacks I don't care as much. It's more that 8 addresses per device.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're talking about deploying, 100 devices, right? Like there's 800 IPs now I just wasted. Even if it's internal only, there's only so much internal only space I can use as well, right? It doesn't even have to be public space, right? And the V6 problem just eliminates that as being an issue of worrying about running out of space, and so that's kind of one of those big hot topics that I'm trying to work on is at least start with the networking side, right? Because not all the servers support V6, right? That's the other problem. Right. And then let's go back and obviously fix the server issue because that's the way bigger one, right? Obviously, I've used way, way more IPs on the server side.
It's not just servers, it's applications and
servers, applications, different. Yeah, some servers might have like 10 IPs on them. So, but my favorite thing that I can do on the wrist is, right, and I think other switches do this too, is I can do V6 routing over, or V4 routing over V6 interfaces.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the whole path is not V6, I can still send all my V4 routes over V6 only point-to-points, right? And so now I no longer use those 8 IPs of V4 at all, right?
Right. No, that's
that's kind of, one of my pet projects.
When you think about making it more approachable to crufty people who are like, oh, but I can't remember V6 addresses and all that, is it like having scripts for debugging or tools so that so you don't have to, be like typing these when you're debugging? You can say that switch, that interface, like do some debug.
Exactly.
Is it numbering so that, V4 and V6 are related, or there's some consistent, like that switch, that interface will be this? Like, what are the things that help crufty people like me, maybe, want to be in that world?
Yeah. So it's slightly wasteful, like the 30 versus 31 argument, but doing 126s instead of 127s, for example, in V6, right? If you do that and you have 4 uplinks, then you'll use the same 4 addresses for your first core, second core, third core, and fourth core. They'll all end in the same number, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one of those little tricks that we do, for example, like in that 4 environment, because then it follows a better pattern that's more human readable. And then, we do a lot of automating for our point-to-points and our V6, everything basically. I've written scripts that will automate making the nice, pretty DNS because I don't need to memorize the IP if I have DNS for everything, including my V6 point-to-points. So then if I do a trace route, it makes sense because I can see the host name with the interface, attached to it on that trace route. So, but DNS for sure.
Well, if it isn't a conflict of interest, I would be interested in, and if work allows it, maybe a NANOG presentation or maybe a panel on, with a few other companies on like cool tricks to, preach it, and at least for network interconnects, internally, move away from V4, which, if you're only doing 20 switches, maybe your bean counters don't care. But if you're doing,
hundreds and hundreds,
then it's money, it is money.
Yeah.
Not to mention being nice to people that still have the mainframes that need to connect and, need to work that way. Cool. So, definitely a lot of people passionate about that, and hopefully I'll be able to attend the panel and ask a couple questions. Mm-hmm. So you got lucky on top of some applied work, getting in to full-time IT and the networking, and moving over to the multi-tenant networking, the switching data side. Yep. Any advice or things that you think about as a community that we can do to help attract people, especially people that are not, a diverse set of people, into networking, to make it more approachable and offer opportunity?
I mean, for me, like mentorship really was the key, right? That was the thing that opened all the doors. And so I think the more we can do with mentorship, the better for sure. Like NANOG, which I'm chair of the program committee over there. The board did start a mentorship committee, and they've been working on ways to get that going. I'm not sure when it officially goes full deployment, but definitely
University is a program
that's
too.
Different. Yeah, the NANOG University is a good way to learn some stuff, but this is a specific committee just for mentorship, where they're working on formulating a whole plan for how we can mentor up and coming engineers, right? And stuff like that I think is super important. I have a huge passion for mentorship because it's really how I got started, right? So I definitely think if you're starting to get interested in the networking engineering world, to find someone that can mentor you, or to ask around and see if you can help find someone to pair up with that can give you advice, can, introduce you to other folks in the network world, right? Like Chris Milliter, like knew everybody at NANOG already when I started going, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't have met half the other people like yourself and others, if I didn't have somebody like him introducing me to all those other people, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, having someone to bounce ideas off with, to learn from, to help mentor you career-wise, actually, in network engineering itself, for the technical details as well. All of that's super useful, I think. And that's how I think we become approachable, though. So likewise, if you are considering being a mentor, right, now is the time. Like, don't wait until somebody finds you, right? People like myself and you, we need to go out there and look for the next, generation of engineer.
Yeah, I mean, we're thinking a lot about that in terms of college. How can we help? Because we have a lot of data about the internet. We can work with grad school. We can talk with people even that are not technologists, because, with peering, it's not all about technology. It's about politics and economics too. And, try to find the bright, shiny-eyed folks. We haven't yet stolen someone, convinced them not to go back to college. We don't have religion about that, but, I can't say if we found someone, who was right, we would at least, give them the option. That's one of the areas where, the education and labs and things, as you mentioned, it's possible to do online. We're thinking about, is there a way that we can help with that? Or, we have some traffic generators help, so that if you stand up a network, we can help, put traffic on it to show that it would look like, or, on the internet side. I need to look at that mentoring thing that you just mentioned. Well, we'll see each other in a few days physically in NANOG. Because, even Andre Tunk, who I talked with, mentioned that at times even NANOG was intimidating for him if you get trapped between even two very nice people, if they start, spittle flying, arguing about, Arista versus whatever, or this library versus that, or this architecture versus that. We have some pedantic, passionate folks. But Nina also found, she just showed up, someone showed her around, introduced her around. She found the community very accommodating. But, I think there are a lot of people for whom it still could be intimidating to, well, especially post-COVID, to go to a thing and then make relationships. And then, so I look forward to learning more about how people can sign up and offer to help mentor.
Yeah, I mean, having a mentor, going to my first conference already like that made it not a scary thing for me at all. But obviously, many people go to those conferences and don't have anybody they know. And that's a totally different experience, like night and day different experience. So
when you all look to hire, if we were talking about, or two people that are earlier in career, what are you looking for? Are you looking for a degree? Are you looking for GitHub? You're looking for, they have labs? What makes you and your peers interested in a candidate?
Yeah, so I recently had an intern last summer, and then we eventually hired him on full time this year. And in that case, when I was looking for an internist first, right, I was looking for some basic knowledge of the concepts, right. I was looking for some programming experience, which this person had, because I knew we wanted to do more with the automation. But mostly, and this goes back to giving it back, right, from what happened with me, is I'm looking for someone with an aptitude for learning. Someone who's not so set in their ways, that isn't going to fight me on every turn, and is going to be willing to hear what everyone has to say on the team and then go research and learn and improve themselves. And we found that in that intern, who's now a full-timer with us. He was extremely eager to learn, had a good solid knowledge of programming, a good solid knowledge of networking, brought new ideas to the table, which is always a plus. So I love someone who can think differently too, personally. If I'm going to have a new member of the team, I don't want them to think just like me, because then we're not going to grow. I need someone who's going to say, well, what about this? I love the what about this, even if it's wrong, but what about this still gets me thinking, And so those are the kind of the things that I look for, right? Someone who has a fresh set of eyes on things, but has good basics and then can learn. And that's the ultimate most important part, though. They can learn, and they're willing to learn, and they're willing to take feedback.
Right. And maybe, understand that learning is the thing, which is our responsibility, right? The company can help train, but you need to be throwing yourself into it.
Exactly.
It's interesting because you said sort of be open to listening to others, but, have new ideas, but it sort of sounds like what I used to do, which is like, okay, I hear you, but I think my way is better. Let me code them both up and I will show you. And then
Exactly.
we can discuss it.
I had a coworker before this current one that was here for like 1 or 2 years. And I had to do that sometimes just to show him, because he wouldn't listen. He was really stubborn. It was the opposite experience, you know? Like he was just convinced that his way of doing things was the only way he should do it. And I would even like code things and be like, look, see, this other way works like, 5 times faster. Yours takes 10 seconds, mine takes 2.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really frustrating that even with like evidence, like here's the proof, like try it a different way. Like that person just wouldn't listen. And it was so frustrating and so hard to work with that person. And like a huge breath of fresh air switching to somebody who is willing to,
Mm-hmm.
to work with me and be open to new ideas. And sometimes I will get it wrong, right? But that's okay. And I know that, right? But somebody who doesn't think they can do any wrong, that's a dangerous thing. I don't want a coworker who thinks they can do no wrong.
That's
goodbye.
How you get supervillains. You get superheroes that turn into supervillains when you have
exactly.
that. And no, we definitely look for that to try to screen out what I call geek binary-itis. There is one true way. There is no grayscale. Like VI, or Silicon Valley made fun of spaces versus tabs. I was so happy when I saw spaces versus tabs on a mainstream TV show. Really, don't we have pretty printers? Can't we just like change, each work in our own syntax and meet in the middle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and going back to your original thing about being approachable too, and getting new people in the field, right? We also have to be willing to accept that the way you and I have been doing things for the last 10 or more years, right, may not be the right way anymore. Maybe that was the right when we started, right? But we also have to have that open mind too. It's not just our new hires.
Yeah.
We need the open mind. We need it too. And so if we get locked in that curmudgeon, way, that's not going to help anybody either. So it kind of goes both ways, right? We both got to be willing to learn from the old and learn from the new.
And, it's interesting for people that are interested in making a company, starting a startup. It's that intersection of, there's a problem that isn't being solved. Maybe this different approach that people say is crazy, is the right way to go. We heard a really amazing story yesterday at Kentech. One of our investors is Gangels in this new round. So it started as LGBTQ plus, but Lorenzo Theon was talking to us, and he happened to randomly run into George Takei and his husband at a show, and then another show, and then they talked, and then he turned around and said, "Can I write a Broadway show for you?" And he had never done that. And I was like, "Oh my God, that's crazy!" And he's like, "Oh, but you have to be crazy too. You have to be crazy." And I'm like, "Oh my God, that takes that's like." But sometimes you say "Wait, why is it done this way?" And that's led to some SDN stuff that didn't make much sense, like centralized flow controllers, and it's led to some stuff that. Look at VMware NSX and VXLAN, and I was like, what's wrong with VLANs? I know how to Python that or Perl it or whatever, but it turns out that most, people that ran servers didn't want to talk to network people and open a ticket and whatever. And so someone would have said, there's no problem with that. So definitely can be interesting if you want to go that path too. So it sounds like you're having fun. I'm having fun too, or I'd be jealous, but any advice you'd give, earlier Kat, from anime, sword fighting to late high school to college to early career?
There's definitely one for sure piece of advice that I would definitely give early Kat. And that was my biggest regret from college times was that I was such in a rush to graduate. So I was, like I said, I was an honors kid, right? I came into class and I had some AP5s scores. So I had a couple of classes that I got credit for in college. And then I took one summer where I took 2 summers. So I did one summer of my core requirements and I did another summer of Japanese full immersion. And between those 2 summers, I was actually able to graduate in 3 years instead of 4. And I would go back and say, don't be in such a rush to grow up, take the full 4 years. And especially the biggest regret of all of these is that I never studied abroad in Japan, and I should have, because once you start working full time, going overseas for a whole year, unless you're going to relocate for your job, probably not happening.
Yeah, we have 2 good friends that did, and one wound up living there one, she was studying pearl divers, for sociology, and the other, as I mentioned, she wound up living there and doing, and I think they both, enjoyed it. We love visiting Japan. We're looking forward.
Yeah, and who knows, if I had done the study abroad, maybe I would have ended up working in something related to Japan instead of doing network engineering. So my whole life might be totally different. But yeah, that whole don't be in such a rush. Because you can do it, don't do it. Take that time in college to really explore those things that are of interest and do something like study abroad if you want to. I should have graduated in 4 years, not 3. And I graduated with honors. I mean, I did well in those 3 years, and obviously I'm doing well career-wise today. But I definitely regret that I never studied abroad. That I only went over for short 2-week trips, and I never did that full semester or full year abroad. So that's the big thing I would tell myself is, if you were thinking about it, do it. There will not be time to do it later. Later,
right? Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I've had a few people in my family who did the Poof You're a Doctor program, which used to be, you do med school and undergrad, and have had some feedback about, maybe I wish I had more time to, do whatever. And then I actually wound up getting into if I had a degree, I would have an undergraduate major in classics, which people don't believe. But I don't have a degree, so it doesn't matter. I know
some people don't have degrees, or they're like me. My degree does absolutely nothing for my career. Like my Japanese degree is not needed at all to do what I do for my day job. So why does it matter that I have a bachelor's and a master's? It doesn't matter at all. I don't use that bachelor's or master's for my engineering at all.
Right. Yeah. And just having a degree doesn't mean you know how to learn in an unstructured way, which can be really helpful. So cool. Well, hopefully people will listen and maybe that'll be helpful to them. And Kat, I really enjoyed this so much. Thank you for joining. I look forward to seeing you in person, either tomorrow in Austin or a few days in Minneapolis. Such is the life of traveling network nerds. Even in the hopefully waning days of COVID. I hope everyone enjoys this conversation.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. Really appreciate it.